Hi, I'm James Verdier, and welcome to the American Institute of Biological Sciences Bioscience Talks, which is a forum for integrating the life sciences. On the second Wednesday of each month, and sometimes in between, we discuss the latest bioscience publications. And as a reminder, if you'd like to read more, point your browser to academic.oup.com/bioscience. Today's episode marks the second in our Impact series, which is built around stories that capture the economic and social benefits derived from scientific research, and also try to capture research's role in shaping the human experience more broadly. For the series, we'll be looking at the people and organizations that really kind of bring science to people's everyday lives. And for the second episode, we were joined by Dr. Elaine Horn-Ranney, who's the co-founder and CEO of Tympanogen, a company that's developing hydrogels to repair eardrums, and doing so without the surgery that's usually been required. Their technology is going to be featured on the upcoming season of NASA Explorers, which actually just began its fourth season on the 29th of January. I'll include a link in the show notes, but for now, let's go straight to the interview. Dr. Horn-Ranney, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Okay, just to get the conversation started, I hope that we could chat a little bit about Tympanogen's flagship technology, Perf-Fix. What is it and how does it sort of fit into the medical setting?
Sure. So our company, Tympanogen, develops ear, nose, and throat devices and wound healing therapies. And our product, Perf-Fix, is intended to replace surgical eardrum repair with an office-based visit. So this product is intended mostly for children who had tubes in their ears because they had chronic ear infections. And we're trying to transition this procedure that would normally be a very invasive surgery into a very fast 10-minute office procedure.
Okay, so this would be a case in which the kids have had tubes in their ears for some period of time because of recurrent ear infections, and now the tubes are being removed?
Yeah, they're either removed or the tubes fall out.
Okay, so the tubes are gone, and now we need to make a repair to the eardrum itself?
Yeah, so about 1 million kids every year will end up with those tubes to relieve the ear infection, but either because the infection keeps coming back or because of the tube itself, some of those children will end up with a permanent perforation of the eardrum that will never heal. And so those are the perforations that we are trying to heal without doing surgery.
Okay, and if you can take us back to the dark ages just a little bit, how is that currently dealt with or previously dealt with in a surgical setting? That was fairly involved, correct?
It is very involved. So for these patients, obviously they have a perforation in their eardrum. So it looks like a pretty minor medical issue, but leaving it untreated can lead to recurrent ear infections, which can affect the patient's hearing. And so even though it's a small problem initially, it can turn into something much nastier. And so that's where surgery comes in, which it's the same surgery that the surgeons have been doing since the 1960s. And it basically involves a giant incision around the base of the ear so that the surgeon can pull it forward and then apply a graft to that perforation to fill it. And hopefully the eardrum will heal within 2 months or so. And so it's a very, very involved surgery. It takes about 2 to 4 hours to complete, depending on how complicated it needs to be. And so, of course, the parents are nervous, and the patient has to stay overnight, and it takes a lot of energy out of the surgeon too, because the reason we were doing this non-surgical route was because when we were speaking to ear, nose, and throat surgeons about some of the things they wish would be different in their practice, they were the ones who said that we would really like to not do this surgery any longer because putting our pediatric patients under general anesthesia is detrimental for them. And there has to be a better, faster, safer way to do this.
And that would be the technology that you've developed. What is that and how does it work?
So Perf-Fix starts out as this jelly-like substance that can be applied directly to the eardrum through the ear canal and then spread across the perforation. And then that allows the surgeon to control the placement of that material in the patient's ear. So when they like the placement of the material, they will then cure it using a dental curing light, the same one that's used to cure fillings. And so that jelly-like material suddenly turns into a more like a gummy bear type substance instead. And so that provides a three-dimensional scaffold that allows the surrounding cells of the eardrum to start growing into that gel. And so the cells are growing into the gel, they consume it, and the gel is eventually completely replaced with new regenerated eardrum tissue.
Okay, and this is then replacing, a previously very intensive surgery that required anesthesia and an overnight stay and all that.
Right. And so one of the gold standards for grafts for eardrum repair is cartilage from the patient's ear, but obviously the cartilage never gets resorbed. It stays in place, and it's not a very good transducer of sound. And so it's another involved surgery to harvest that cartilage, shape it into a size that will fit into the perforation, and then hope that the cartilage graft will stay in place.
So in this case, not only are you avoiding, a potentially lengthy and intensive surgery, you're also getting a better outcome as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the really exciting things about our technology is that we're generating the original structure of the eardrum itself. And so it's not just a Band-Aid, it's not just a placeholder, it's actually helping the cells regenerate and completely replace the material itself with the same sort of tissue that looks exactly like the original eardrum.
Okay, and I hope we can talk more about it in a little bit, and also about some of the wound healing applications. But let's talk through the story a little bit. How does this kind of technology or idea come into being? When did you think of it, and where were you, and how does that process sort of work?
I think with a lot of these things, it takes a little bit of luck and a little bit of opportunity meeting at the right time. So when we first started thinking about this technology, was actually before we'd even thought about the problem or anything like that. I was in the middle of my PhD in biomedical engineering down at Tulane University in New Orleans, and my PhD work was focused on developing gels for directing nerve growth in 3 dimensions, which was good as a research tool, but was not directly applicable to patients. And so when I was about halfway through my PhD, I asked my husband, who was in medical school at the time, to look for any application for these gels that I was making in the hospital setting so that I could do something more clinically focused. And so about 2 weeks later, he comes back and says, "Oh, you should replace surgical eardrum repair with one of your gels to make an office-based procedure." It's like, well, that sounds brilliant.
So I'm curious now. Was it just sort of, the supposition that this is a gel that, human tissue will sort of naturally grow onto as a scaffold?
Yeah, so it did start out with, a base of knowledge from my PhD work of gels and materials that were amenable for tissue growth.
Okay, and so your husband has the idea of using this for, non-surgical eardrum repair.
Yeah, he did a rotation through the Children's Hospital through the ear, nose, and throat department in New Orleans, and literally 2 weeks after I said, look out for something that we can use our gel for in the hospital. And so that was what he noticed, that this is a very involved surgery for, most of these patients are under 10 years old. And so he saw the parents be nervous about the surgery. The surgeons themselves were, so keep in mind too, that these are surgeons who were telling us that they did not want to perform a surgery. And so that's how this really came about, was just a medical student being married to an engineer that had the right skill set and seeing a clinical need.
Okay, so you've got all of those things in place, and that's excellent. But then, I'm seeing a couple of numbered steps here with a lot of question marks next to them into how this becomes a company. What's that process look like?
So after we had the idea to use a gel for eardrum repair, I brought in one of my lab mates, who was also my best friend, and we basically hashed out a prototype over donuts, and because she thought it was a great idea. And so then we went to since we were graduate students, we went to the technology transfer office at our university and told them about our idea. And since we were grad students, the university owned everything that we did. But in exchange for filing the patent application on our behalf, they gave us a small grant to fund our first prototype study. And through that, we developed our prototype, tested it in an animal model, and got the same high success rates as surgery using our non-surgical gel and procedure.
Okay, and does the university continue to own the technology, or is that transferred over to you?
The university does own it, and so we licensed it from Tulane. Tympanogen licensed the technology from Tulane.
Okay, so you've got the small grant, and you start to set it up. What are the next steps in, what's the pathway from, having an idea and a proof of concept to getting this into patients' ears?
So the next step we did was go through a bunch of business plan competitions. So this was extremely helpful for us because as coming from an academic background, we didn't really have a lot of exposure to industry settings or how to translate technologies off of the bench and into patient setting. And so we did these business plan competitions, and that forced us to think about the whole life cycle of the technology and the company that we were forming around the technology. And so we ended up winning about over $80,000 in free money through those competitions. But we also learned an immense amount about our business and what we need to do in order to keep moving forward.
And what are those moves? I have to profess that I know very little about what it would take to get a technology like this onto the market. Kind of what are the next things you do after you've kind of, won these competitions, you've got a little bit of money to work with. What happens next?
So then we started looking at similar technologies and what commercial pathway they took. So we knew that we were in the ear, nose, and throat space. And so there were not any really competing products for our technology, but there were some, other similar, gel-based technologies that we could reference. And so we looked at the regulatory pathways for those technologies, and we ended up having a meeting with the FDA to better understand our regulatory pathway, and that has helped inform a lot of the decisions that we've been making going forward as we prepare our technology to be submitted to the FDA for their approval.
And what would it be approved as? Is this a device, a drug?
Yeah, so it is a medical device, thankfully. So that's a very different regulatory pathway from a drug, of course. And so, when we were choosing the components of the gel, we picked things that we had, in our experience, were not going to be toxic. And so when we were having our conversation with the FDA and talking about our safety studies, it basically came out that we could have a very expedited regulatory pathway, which minimized, of course, the time and cost associated with getting to FDA approval for our device. And so that's where we are right now, is trying to finish up our safety studies so that we can send it to FDA next year.
Okay, and those safety studies just depend on using, generally recognized as safe materials?
It's a lot of biocompatibility testing, and those are standard tests that FDA requires of similar devices like ours.
And what goes into that testing?
So we actually use a contractor who they operate an FDA audited facility, and it's a lot of implantation studies and cell toxicity studies.
Okay, and so has the gel been used in patients yet, or is that something still to come?
Our clinical studies will take place around 2021. We're hoping, like after we have FDA clearance. We don't need clinical data in order to get FDA clearance for our product, since it is a fairly, at this stage, it appears to be fairly safe, and so we'll just get. So we have to get FDA's clearance for that. And then we'll go into our human studies in 2021. So we've not tested it in humans yet, but we get emails every day from patients who ask us when our device is going to be ready.
Yeah, I would certainly be, calling your phone number if I had kids who were, suffering from recurrent ear infections. That's, as a parent, that sounds like a terrifying thing to have to do, to go through those types of surgeries.
Yeah, and we actually get a lot of adult patients too who have had multiple failed surgeries, who are just looking for any alternative that will help them out too.
Okay, and so then after your human studies are performed in 2021, the product goes up for sale and you take the world by storm.
Yep, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Okay, excellent. And so let's talk about potentially some other uses of the technology as well. So you mentioned wound healing. Is there a similar role to play?
So we actually just finished up a study on the International Space Station earlier this year, and as a tangential project to what we're currently doing, but we're looking at how we can start adapting the basic core of the gel technology to other wound healing applications, and specifically for developing medical devices for delivering therapeutics for long-term space travel.
And what kind of therapeutic application would it have in that setting?
So we're thinking about when astronauts are in the microgravity conditions in the International Space Station, they undergo a lot of physiological changes, being in basically not having the influence of gravity for months on end. And so one of the issues that they have is difficulty regulating intracranial pressure. So when they come back to Earth, they end up with a lot of eye issues because of it. And so, we can make some baby steps toward developing medical devices that have very predictable drug release patterns, and maybe using them as therapeutics to whether they would be regulating intracranial pressure or any other physiologic issue that astronauts may encounter while they're on the space station.
And so this preliminary study was just, sending some of the gel up and getting a kind of an idea of how it behaved in a microgravity environment?
Yeah, so when we started on this project, we noticed that no one had looked at how gels behave in microgravity conditions or had done a drug release study in microgravity conditions either. And so if we want to look at developing materials for space applications, there is a lot of research that other investigators have done to indicate that gravity has a big influence on material formation and diffusion of molecules. And so we're looking at how our gel forms and how the drug release profile changes without the bias of gravity. And so we are going through that data right now, and we're hoping to publish it in the near future, but we did get some very interesting results from it.
Okay, and so what's next for Tympanogen beyond the things we've already talked about in terms of human testing and a pathway to the market, et cetera?
Well, definitely the trying to get Perf-Fix to market as fast as possible is our main focus right now, because every day that we don't have Perf-Fix available for patients, that's every single day that pediatric patients are undergoing this same surgery over and over again. So it's really on us to try to make the change and push this product along as fast as possible. And that's one of the reasons that we actually founded the company. So Tympanogen was founded by my husband, Jesse Ranney, and my best friend, Parastu Khoshakla. And when we founded the company, we did so because we truly believe that no one else is going to solve this problem unless we did something about it. Surgeons have been doing the same surgery for over 50 years, and nothing has changed since the 60s. So that's really what drives us and keeps us moving forward to help get Perf-Fix into the hands of patients as fast as possible.
Okay, so with such an amazing technology coming out and the potential for such widespread adoption, I often find myself wondering how big is a company like yours? I've been to your lab personally, but are there 500 people behind some trick wall somewhere all working hard at this, or is it still a relatively small group?
We're still a very small group. We have 3 full-time employees, including myself, and several advisors as well. And we don't plan on growing very large either over the lifespan of the company. So a lot can be done with very few people if you can stay focused.
And so, how will that necessarily change, as you go forward into putting the product on the market?
We do plan on hiring, several people over the next 3 years to help us, get through our regulatory process and then actually into the hands of the surgeons so we can help our patients. But we're also looking at, more effective ways to distribute our product through distribution partners. And one of the good things about the customers that we're serving, which are the ENT surgeons, but they are a very small group, a close-knit group of people. So, it's fortunate for us that we can approach all these customers pretty rapidly through very successful clinical studies.
Okay, so you're dealing with a relatively small, audience of professionals who are going to be using this in the office. So you're not, for instance, reaching out to, every general practitioner in the country and trying to get them to adopt it.
Correct.
We'll look forward to hearing more. Before we close out, though, I was hoping, you could tell us a little bit about what the experience has been like making that move from academia to industry.
When my co-founders and I started Tympanogen, we were all coming out of an academic setting. And transitioning out of the academic mindset and into an industry mindset has taken a lot of work and some, good and hard lessons both. So it's been a very good, fun journey. And then when it ever does get hard for us, we think about, well, would I rather be doing something else? And the answer is always no. So that's what keeps us motivated to keep going and work through all the ups and downs that a startup encounters.
And I think that'll be a fantastic note to leave it on. But before we do, which is tougher, working in academia or being a CEO?
There's a lot more accountability on you when you're the CEO of the startup. So I would say being the CEO is much harder than graduate school. Even though graduate school, I think, prepared me very well for a startup role in terms of being comfortable with failure and being comfortable with the unknown. So both of those things are critical in building a successful startup.
That's fantastic, and we'll definitely look out for more to come. Dr. Horn-Ranney, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And that concludes this episode of Bioscience Talks. Just a reminder, the journal Bioscience is published by Oxford University Press on behalf of the American Institute of Biological Sciences and is made possible by the support of our members and donors. Thank you, and talk to you next time.